The big question, is agentic development just coding faster with agents, or is there a bigger, more fundamental paradigm shift that we need to make with our software development today?
We think there is a new development paradigm in agentic development. The primary challenges in agentic development are, one is it's non-deterministic. The second is that it revolves around intent, not code. The third is that agentic development is faster than anything we've seen before. And that means that we can't rely on noticing when things go sideways.
What is the solution to this?
I do think that the hammer that we have is context. LLMs eventually are just stateless machines that we pass a bunch of context to, and they calculate their weights and they figure out what the next words are. An easy way to understand this is to think about humans. What are your tools for managing a team communication? So alongside talking about it, we actually have been building products around this. And we have a platform from a business perspective. Think of it as an agent enablement platform, onboards agents onto your environment with all of those policies and practices. And then it helps continuously educate them, continuously improve the context.
When we use something like context, what is the key to using context and making agentic development successful?
The first thing you need to do is you need to
Before we jump into this episode, I wanted to let you know that this podcast is for developers building with AI at the core. So whether that's exploring the latest tools, the workflows, or the best practices, this podcast's for you. A really quick ask, 90% of people who are listening to this haven't yet subscribed. So if this content has helped you build smarter, hit that subscribe button and maybe a like. All right, back to the episode.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the AI Native Dev. My name is Simon Maple. I'm the co-host for today. Joining me, Guy Podjarny.
Indeed, you're a slightly less frequent recently co-host here.
That's true. We've been together a little bit more recently. So why don't we take a step back and actually zoom out a little bit? In this episode, we're going to be asking the big question, is agentic development just coding faster with agents, or is there a bigger, more fundamental paradigm shift that we need to make with our software development today? We're going to be asking the questions. Do I just need to learn how to talk to agents better, or are there greater things that we need to learn in the practices of agentic development?
I think agentic development, it's clearly powerful, right? And we've spoken a lot and we'll probably speak more, on how the daily practices have changed. But I think there is also the broader kind of agentic development as a team practice. And over there are a whole set of fundamental changes and challenges that come along with them. I would say the primary challenges in agentic development are, one is it's non-deterministic. And so we're all too used to, hey, we run a build. If it compiled once, it'll compile twice. Yes, there's it works on my computer versus not, but otherwise it's fairly deterministic. So that creates a whole new set of considerations about how do we develop software when repeatable processes are so hard to make. The second is that it revolves around intent, not code. We said that from the very beginning, that software development will become spec-centric, not code-centric, and that code will become disposable. That felt more controversial a couple of years ago than it does today. It's still not something that everybody will agree with, but I think it is very clear that software development anchors on intent, on what you want built, on your constraints. And so that's another kind of primary change or challenge that we face on what are these kind of nuggets of intent, how do we enforce it, how do we express ourselves, a lot of human analogies. And then the third is maybe just a multiplication, and that is agentic development is faster than anything we've seen before. And we've had a version of this when DevOps came about, where we said, well, wow, it's moving so fast. And all of our kind of human processes of how do we identify a problem and intervene, right? How do we prevent it? All of those broke apart when DevOps came about, and we had to introduce these continuous processes. Now we see another 1 or 2 orders of magnitude acceleration. And that means that we can't rely on noticing when things go sideways, on intervening and changing it at that time. It's hard for other people to supervise one person's work because a single developer can be so productive. And so I'd say those are the 3 primary kind of deltas or challenges that agentic development introduces that we have to think about how do we adapt to and how do we change the way we develop to deal with.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like a lot of them not new to today. Things like the non-determinism, the intent, and so forth. These are things that we're talking about from the very very start. What else have you heard in kind of like conversations? I know you've been speaking with so many people at events as well as the users and customers. What other things have you learned?
Yeah, I think it's so hard to reduce these things to three. So, like, if those are the three primary elements, I'd say the next three, that I would highlight are one is that LLMs and agents have a bias for reimplementation versus reuse.
Mhm.
So that is something we battle with all the time. It's interesting because in some cases reuse is less important because creating software is cheaper than ever before.
Mhm.
But there are still various cases in which if instead of calling the relevant function of a library, the LLM has chosen or an agent has chosen to re-implement it. Now you can't upgrade or fix that functionality. It's new bugs, there's reasons we do reuse of software. So I'd say that's a bias that we need to deal with. Some humans have that as well, so maybe not quite unusual, but it's very significant. Um, the second is that LLMs and agents are constantly a little bit outdated. By the very definition of how they're built, their knowledge is at least a few months old from the time the last model was trained,
Mhm.
and so that is another challenge we always have to sort of think about how do we deal with. And then I think of LLMs and agents as cheap then expensive. They are cheap in the sense that you can build things so much faster and with so much less human effort than before, and that is cheap. But then once you start using them, now Opus 4.6 runs with its fast mode that is 2.5 times the speed at 6 times the cost, and already at the top model. It's amazing. It adds up. And so it's gone from a great way to save money to, okay, this is now also a significant spend, and introduces questions on how do you manage spend. We knew how to do that with humans and with hiring locations and a variety. What's the right way to do that with agents? So all of those, and I'm sure even these six are not a comprehensive list, but I think it's a useful starting point.
So there's a lot of problems there, Guy. What is the solution to this? I'm guessing you're going to say something about context.
Well, now that you put this in context, it is so yes, I think there are a lot of challenges over there, and some of them are human, and we need to deal with them. But I do think that the hammer that we have as we look at all these nails or nail-like problems is context. And the reason for that is that LLMs eventually are just sort of stateless machines that we pass a bunch of context to, and they calculate their weights and they figure out what the next words are. And so managing what are the words that come in, what is the information that comes in, is really our primary tool. It is both our human means of alignment. Those are the words, the institutional knowledge preservation, and how do we make sure that we work as a team and as an ecosystem. And they are the way in which you communicate and convey things to the LLMs. I guess an easy way to understand this is to think about humans. What are your tools for managing a team?
Mhm.
Communication.
Mhm.
That's really how you can work with it. How do you incentivize behavior, as in what you respond to and how do you respond to it. And I think a lot of those analogies really come down to context. And so I think the core competency in agentic development is context management.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of types of context. There are rules that you are kind of explicitly and aggressively pushing. There are skills that you are hinting and making available to the agent to try and pull down. There are docs, that is information that is available for the agents to find and use at its time. And I'm sure there will be other variations of how do you uh, drive the agents to consume and load the right context. And and then you have to think for yourself when you think about the development paradigm, how do you manage that context?
And that's actually to keep that parallel with humans and people. It's really interesting because, rules, for example, things that are mandatory for an agent to learn, these are very similar to the rules that we have to abide by, whether they're, organizational rules or development rules which we want to follow. Docs, for example, could be reference docs. A developer doesn't keep all of that in their mind, but as and when they need to learn something, they know where to go and then they can learn that. So realistically, it's kind of like a little bit like onboarding these agents with amounts of knowledge and intelligence, or those types of things, you wouldn't expect a human to do that without this type of
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah.
So I guess when we use something like context, what is the key to using context and making agentic development successful?
Is you need to write down what it is that you want the agent to do, right? Consider, you have a team, people have different opinions. Consider that there's a lot of institutional knowledge. You have to write those down. You should absolutely use agents to help you write that content and refine it, but you need to review it and understand what is written. Again, think about a team and think about aligning between the team. At some point, you need to talk through the possibilities and choose which ones you want. The second bit is you have to evaluate how well do the agents listen. Agents vary in the type of content and the type of length and verbosity that they would need to be able to apply changes. It's really the models that vary, not the agents. But even so, some are tuned to use more tools. Some are smaller models that need more explicit instructions. Some are very big models that lean into intelligence. So we've discussed many of these things on this podcast. And you really have to, after you've defined it, optimize the way you say things. Once again, human analogies work very well. You can communicate some things better or worse, and it depends on your audience. The third is you have to then kind of communicate it out, or like broadcast this to the broader set. Understand that, make sure that the agents that needs to hear your words hear those words. And then lastly, you want to observe what happens in the real world. If evaluations are more like your tests before you roll something out, right? They're more the focus audience, that you've tested your message with. The observation is really actually, polling to see what happened after. And just like we've learned from DevOps, and that, in the non-deterministic systems that are our runtime servers, and that you can't just anticipate whether they will go down or not. You have to monitor them and respond. Similarly, agents aren't, non-deterministic creatures, and you have to assess, okay, are they actually working the way I expect them to? Learn from that and come back. So these notions of like define and capture, evaluate, communicate, or distribute or broadcast, your context, and then observe what happened and rinse, repeat.
And this isn't something that you quickly run, back to back and then kind of like learn from straight away. This happens in our existing workflow at different times, right? You get different loops that can kind of help you with this feedback. Where would you say each of those fit in with today's development workflow?
Yeah, there definitely are various places in which you'd apply, these different steps. I think, especially for a developer audience, the most useful thing to imagine is the DevOps loop. We're all familiar with that sort of infinite
We
loop.
always keep going back to that loop, right?
You might say it's infinite.
It is. Infinite
Returning to it. And so clearly the DevOps loop, has more dev on the left side, and more ops on the right side. But really you can start at any point depending on kind of what your current situation is. So you can think that on the more dev side of it, the left side, you can think about analyzing your current situation. So what do you already know about your code base, about, what has happened, about people's desired. So that's a little bit of that define and capture. So you analyze that, then you generate the right documentation, and then you evaluate that. And you can continue with that loop as much as you can, as much as you feel is needed. So you've evaluated, you've seen whether it's good, maybe you've learned something. So you come back, you analyze those results, you generate again. So you repeat that as much as you think is right. And then once you're ready, once your context is good, then you go on to more of the ops side, which is you distribute, similar to deploying. You leverage, so you actually kind of execute, you run the context. Non-trivial effort over there, right? You have to think about activation. There's a lot of complexity over there. And then you observe, coming back to running system. And so this type of infinite loop continues again and again. You observe, you now have more information. You might modify your synthetic tests to represent the real world again, and that might imply some problems you identify, therefore you regenerate the context, and so on and so forth. And in that infinite loop, I think there are the classic needs and sort of tools that you need that are similar to those that we have in development. There are some build time, interactive sort of development time systems. There are some tests like the evaluations that we need to put at certain points in time. You might not have a comprehensive test, but they need to be sufficiently representative of reality so you don't regress, with the different changes. And then in the runtime, you need things that are more scalable. You might sample behavior versus, tackle all of it. You need statistically successful behavior might not need perfection. So I think you need that type of looping, and this is I guess what we would think of as the context development lifecycle, right? As it evolves, that complements the SDLC.
Absolutely. And it's funny how we keep going back to that figure of 8, right? But I think what's most interesting is we use the right tools at the right time. And so, for example, evaluate, as you were mentioning, the evals that we use there, they're fast because we're able to do it with the data that we have at that right time. They're not necessarily going to be the most precise given all the data that we have, but it's that feedback that
Right.
then adds back into that eval to actually provide us with the data that we know that actually this is a correct eval, or actually we need to update this eval in this way. And so that kind of like gets us that more close to that perfection.
Yeah,
As we
correct.
go.
And we have, like, we're familiar with that from tests, right? We have unit tests, we have integration tests, we have end-to-end tests, and they are increasingly expensive to run,
Mm.
and harder to run. And so we use sort of smaller scope indications. So maybe we evaluate our pieces of context frequently. Every time we change some policy instruction or some documentation about a library, you might want to evaluate that every time. But other types of systems, like maybe evaluating a repo's context, sort of say, well, there are a lot of bits of context in this repository on it. Can agents handle that? I want to run an evaluation for that. I want to draw conclusions about how well does it work, and what can I do to improve it. So those might be more expensive. You might run them more like end-to-end tests, right? Every now and then, but not regularly. So I don't know if the one-to-one analogies of unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests will work, but I think there will be a version of kind of lightweight evaluations and local evaluations that expand into broader system ones.
Yeah, absolutely. It gets us closer to where we need to be to tune.
Exactly. I think the very first guest we had on the podcast was Des from Intercom,
Yeah.
and he talked about how at the time, even for the agents that they had built in, it was before coding agents were really a thing, they had their regression test evaluations for their agent to know if it's doing the right thing. And then they had their torture test. That was sort of the comprehensive ones. And so they didn't run the torture test for every change, to their prompts. They ran it when a new model came along. So, and I think as we use agents to understand our unique environments in development, we kind of need to develop our regression evals and our torture evals, for agents as they enter our development environment.
Yeah. Still the best named tests, by the way, that I've
The
heard.
torture test,
Yeah,
yeah,
torture.
much better than end-to-end.
Yeah, it's true. Very true. Let's get deeper into context and maybe talk about use cases of context. What people want to use context for. What would you say?
Yeah, I think that's probably the part that has evolved the most, and we had to see it in kind of the real world. I'd say today I see 3 types of context. I know I'm sort of keep repeating things in 3 on it. Maybe it's too ingrained into the corporate world, but I feel there are these sort of 3 types of context that we see development teams and organizations roll out. One is more policy or best practice related context. So this might be a security policy you're disseminating, or a choice of what is good design over here, or sometimes constraints around financial, like how much to optimize for budget versus for speed or something like that. So those are oftentimes wrapped in skills or in some other document. They're not tied to a specific piece of code.
And fairly reusable across an organization.
And they should be. You can have, actually, what we see in enterprises is that we see that they are hierarchical. You might have, just like with any policy, you have, just like you would communicate to humans, you might have something that is company-wide, and then there might be a slight override within a business unit, and maybe an even more specific override in maybe a specific application, a specific team. And so they might inherit from one another, right? To the Java fans in our audience. And so you have those. So in those cases, you want to create the words, right? Like, write it down. That is the core of it. You want to evaluate how well would agents listen. And in this case, it's very important to define what does good look like. Because you might say, here's a policy to say, write something, make sure my code is secure. Well, that's a very broad definition. Be specific, get a little bit more detailed. And oftentimes the evaluations are the ones that indicate, what do you mean by the words that you that you say. And so you want to evaluate it. And then you can optimize to that evaluation. If you didn't invest in the evaluations, you're going to optimize for the wrong thing. So be mindful. Once you have that, you want to distribute that and make sure the right agents are getting the right information and that they update that over time, and of course observe behavior. So that's kind of one strand, right? That's the kind of policy/practice path. The second one that we see is documenting your internal platform. That's maybe the most common, which is I have libraries of my own in my organization. I have my billing system. I have my kind of a technical cloud infrastructure that I'm using, that all my applications need to be deployed on. There's no reason for the agent to know any of this stuff.
It shouldn't. It all being well, it shouldn't.
There is no, if it didn't leak into the weights of it, it's some of the first waves of the LLMs, it doesn't know about it. It's not in its weight. And so you have to inform the agent about that. Yes, technically the agent can sometimes go out and try and find it amidst the code base and extract that out. That's error-prone, expensive, very inefficient, because you're going to need this information again and again. And if it gets something wrong, well, how do you find out? Because oftentimes the consumer of the platform is not the one that actually has built the platform. And so this notion of a central rollout of the knowledge of your ecosystem, of your technology, is very, very common. Once again, you want to generate the documentation. In this case, you typically have a source of truth, which is the actual code of that platform, examples of usage of it. So that generation can oftentimes be quite automated. You want to evaluate it to know that modifications to it do not regress. You want to roll that out and make it available to anybody consuming the platform. And then you want to observe that behavior and follow it. Importantly for this one also, you have to maintain it, because your library, your platform will change over time. You now need regular processes to update that. Then the last one I would say is more application context or in-repo context. So this is the case where increasingly people understand that with agentic development, you have to be somewhat disciplined around capturing the definition of what your app does. What is the functionality here? Because otherwise, if you ask the agent to make a change and it went sideways, you don't know like where did it go wrong. There was never a definition of what right is. So you have to have some definition of what correct is. You have to have some documentation, and those get captured. But again, just like software rots, context will rot. So over time, if you created those docs, but you're not methodical about knowing that it's good, that it hasn't regressed, that it stayed up to speed as things changed. So what we see over there is actually a flow that starts with evaluation. So you have your first question is, can agents handle my code base? Maybe if it's small enough and it's written very well, they can handle the code base fine. You don't need any additional context. But as the systems grow, you need they would need more support to be able to effectively work.
The challenges that you kind of like outlined at the very start
Exactly.
amplify as that code base grows and the team grows.
Precisely. As the team grows, the code base grows, the kind of the complexity, the subtlety of some decisions. And so I'd say this flow starts with an evaluation. It starts with take the repository, go back in history, extract out some set of representative commits or pull requests that show typical work in this repository, and turn those into evaluation scenarios. And that is, by the way, already very interesting to see, well, how well can agents develop here? And out of those, you can say, okay, seeing the failures that they've had, what type of context changes might I need over here? What can I add? What can I remove? You will find that there are some documents that you have that are just unnecessary. The agent totally gets it, doesn't need it. So you're just wasting context space. And then you'd find there are other cases in which the agent is failing. It doesn't understand some type system. It keeps erring on some specific piece of the code. And so for those, you can create context. Once you have that evaluation, you do that optimization, you come back to make sure that context is available, observe real world scenarios, and keep that context fresh as it moves.
And that's the important thing, keep it fresh, because this is a point in time of how this project looks today. In 6 months' time, in 1 year's time, it's going to be looked differently, and you need to keep that up to date.
Yes.
And this is an evolving process, continuous process, and needs to continually update.
Yeah. And I'd say like the weight on each of these different steps changes from team to team, from application to application. There might be some cases in which observing, for instance, is sufficient for you. Like your team is very nimble, very fast moving. The application is sufficiently small that you feel like it's okay for you to observe and identify context failures, create some new context, and roll it out without evaluating, without tests, right? And you might be fine with that for a while, because evaluations or creating tests are, is an effort. But I think as we've seen with tests, you're gonna regret that decision at some point, as that system goes, because it means every time you make a context change, you have no way of knowing whether you've just introduced a problem. It means when a new platform comes along, a new model, or if you want to run it on something cheaper, you have no means of knowing whether that system would work. The only way that you have to do that is to roll it out and hope for the best, and see how people respond, or even observe the logs. And so I think different emphasis on, do you want to lead with evaluation, lead with observation, lead with generation, lead with optimization. All of these things, they are choices, and they're okay, and they will vary from time to time. But I think they all repeat in various orders in these sort of three use cases of kind of policy dissemination or sort of practice dissemination, platform documentation, and kind of application context.
Yep.
So we talk about this a lot. And so alongside talking about it, we actually have been building products around this for quite a few months now, and been working with partners and building it out. And we have a platform. From a business perspective, think of it as an agent enablement platform. So it's a platform that helps agents, be enabled, successful. It onboards agents onto your environment with all of those policies and practices, and then it helps continuously educate them, continuously improve the context. And so we have that. On a technical level, it's more of a context development and distribution platform. So we give you that sort of CDLC, and or like dubious choice of acronym of that.
Just drop a new acronym in there.
Yeah, the Context Development Lifecycle. I'm not sure we're going to use that, but we enable this context development lifecycle. We help you, generate context, evaluate that context, extract evaluation scenarios from existing knowledge. We help you, of course, run them, observe. So we do all of that sequence, so you can develop and own your context. And then we, of course, help you distribute. You've sort of seen that we are the package manager for skills. We are, we support and enable skills within organizations as well, but also externally. And so we're very kind of committed to making these types of evaluation services and context distribution available for the open source context as well. And so we help you do both of those. And in general, coming back maybe to the root of it, we think there is a new development paradigm in agentic development. It is substantially different than what we've seen in software. And it doesn't actually replace the SDLC, it integrates into the SDLC in various places. And we think that context is needed in many places. For instance, we see the same skill or the same tile, which is our kind of package of context, get consumed while someone is locally developing and trying to, get the agent to succeed. We see that very same tile be used in code review when you are deploying it, or maybe in incident review when it tries to understand what has happened and it needs some information about how the system operates. The same context is applied across different agents, across different models. And so we think context is a separate asset that you want to develop, and your SDLC will right now is very, very critical, but over the years it'll become closer to a build system. It'll become a very critical system within your platform, and one that you should invest in, but one that is kind of run by bots, used by bots mostly. Like it is not, it is set up and configured, but most of the activity within it is done by automated workflows. So we're excited to be the sort of new agent enablement platform, maybe CDLC platform. We'll see. And you'll see us use the word skills in our kind of communications a lot. We think context is broader than skills, but skills are a very helpful term right now as people think about a unit of context that they move around. And so we embrace that. We think terminology will probably shift, 3 or 4 more times, as the world moves around. And that's not our focus.
Maybe in and out of CDLC, maybe.
Yeah, maybe CDLC is premature because it knows that C is going to be the word there.
Yeah.
We started our journey with specs,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing. It doesn't really matter what it's called. And so we are emphasizing the term skills, although skills are really just a subset of the context that we support. But really, we are committed to this notion of, whether it's skills or it's context or it's tiles or it's specs, we help you create it, we help you own it, we help you develop it over time. And we think that will become the core competency for a software development organization.
Awesome. And if you're interested to learn more, why don't you head over to Tessel.io, where you can actually do a lot of self-serve. You can go ahead and discover, you can use, download and use, you can even publish your own context skills and tiles.
Indeed.
And if you wanted to learn more, maybe you have a more complex, larger environment that you're trying to use context to enable, why don't you reach out at contact@tessel.io. But for now, thank you very much, Guy. That was really enlightening about how the space has evolved and changed and how Tesla's positioned in that.
Yep. Thanks, Simon. And, again, a good opportunity to say thanks for the amazing team that we have that's been building all this thing. And I'm just here sharing a bunch of their wisdom and hard work. And thank you to the amazing users and early customers that have helped to shape a bunch of these practices and truly are shaping the future of software development. So looking forward to hearing from more of you amazing people and organizations as you reach out.
Thanks very much, and tune in to the next episode.